Good morning, everyone. And now I'd like to, because it's a democratic process, see who would like to sing a song from the spiritual world. Let me count up and see who wins. Yeah? There are different gradations even in the spiritual world. And there's a topmost place, which is qualified as topmost because of the intensity of the love that the devotees have there for Krishna. It's a very special kind of devotion that they have. It's very personal. And it's very intimate, and we could say unceremonious, just like when you have a best friend, you may say something to cut your friend down right in front of him or other people, and then you'll both laugh because it's so funny that you said something at his expense or her expense. Do you have a friendship like that anywhere? I have one, and when we're joking with each other, we can say things, yeah, but you're so whatever, and then we both laugh and laugh. Or if we bump into each other, it's just feels natural. Or if we sit on the same seat and we're sort of hanging over each other, that's natural because there's a sense of deep connection. So in the teachings of bhakti, there's a realm in which the devotees of God, Krishna, are so intimately connected with him that they don't see him as the Supreme or God. They just see him as a best friend, or they see him as their son, or they see him as a lover. And now we'll gratefully receive the Srimad Bhagavatam. This is where, in a book, the eternity meets temporality. We may think paper and ink, but the sound vibration, of course, writing is speech abstracted, and the sound vibration that comes from the Srimad Bhagavatam is described in the 5th chapter of the Bhagavatam, Tadvag Visargo Janataga Viplavo Yasmin Pratishlokam Abhadyavadyapi. That this vibration that comes from the book, Srimad Bhagavatam, is not from this world, but it's from a different realm, that which is not material. And when one listens to the vibration of the Bhagavatam, discusses it amongst the devotees, then one will be transformed. So the class, the Srimad Bhagavatam class, is something that's done all over the world in this organization. I'm trying to find out exactly when it started. I wrote to Pradyumna Prabhu, and he wasn't sure. And he said, better ask Satsvarup Maharaj, as he was there closer to the beginning. But I got an automatic message back saying it's going to take a while to hear back from him. And I asked a few others also who weren't sure, but I'm looking into it. But there is a point at which, as Satyadev Prabhu was describing while we were in Japan the other day, that there was no Srimad Bhagavatam, nor was there a morning program in ISKCON. Devotees mostly went out to chant in public. And then Prabhupada instituted gradually a system for hearing the Bhagavatam in the morning and also having some special programs like we did this morning. And the Srimad Bhagavatam, of course, is foundational in making advancement in bhakti. And we'll find out more why that is as we describe, as we read from the Bhagavatam and discuss it. Today's verse will be from the 3rd canto, 25th chapter, and it's the 25th verse. And this is part of the teachings of Lord Kapiladev, who's one of Krishna's avatars, comes to the world to teach bhakti, and he's teaching it to his mother. So in this verse today, he'll specifically, Kapiladev will, speak about the importance of association. With whomever we associate with, we develop the qualities of. And as a invocation, I'll say a mantra and everyone can repeat if you wish. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Now I'll say the whole thing. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this is a mantra that we say before we read the Srimad Bhagavatam together, offering respects to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the verse today goes like this. I'll read the word for word meanings first. And I'll say it and then please repeat. Satam of pure devotees. Prasangat through the association. Mama, my, virya, wonderful activities. Samvida, by discussion of. Bhavanti, become. Hrit, to the heart. Karna, to the ear. Rasayana, pleasing. Katha, the stories. Tat, of that. Joshanat, by cultivation. Ashu, quickly. Apavarga, of liberation. Vartmani, on the path. Shraddha, firm faith. Rati, attraction. Bhakti, devotion. Anukramishati, will follow in order. And the translation is, in the association of pure devotees, discussion of the pastimes and activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is very pleasing and satisfying to the ear and the heart. By cultivating such knowledge, one gradually becomes advanced on the path of liberation, and therefore he is freed from his attraction. He is freed, and his attraction becomes fixed. Then real devotion and devotional service begin. And we'll go back to the Romanized Sanskrit, and I'll say it line by line, and if you like, you can repeat. Satam prasangan mama virya samvido. Bhavanti hritkarna rasayana kata. Taj joshanad ashvapa vargavartmani. Shraddha ratir bhaktir anukramishati. Purport, which is written by Srila Prabhupada. He had gone through the Srimad Bhagavatam, and he had a book which had several commentaries from previous teachers. And as he was surveying what they had said, he would speak into a dictaphone, and he would bring to light the most important points that they brought, plus any other of the important points he wanted to bring forward at this point. So what we get here is an explanation in each one of the verses of giving context to the verse itself and also the main important points. main and important points. So here it is. The process of advancing in Krishna consciousness and devotional service is described here. The first point is that one must seek the association of persons who are Krishna conscious and who engage in devotional service. Without such association, one cannot make advancement. Simply by theoretical knowledge or study, one cannot make any appreciable advancement. One must give up the association of materialistic persons and seek the association of devotees, because without the association of devotees, one cannot understand the activities of the Lord. Generally, people are convinced of the impersonal feature of the Absolute Truth. Because they do not associate with devotees, they cannot understand that the Absolute Truth can be a person and have personal activities. This is a very difficult subject matter, and unless one has personal understanding of the Absolute Truth, there is no meaning to devotion. Service or devotion cannot be offered to anything impersonal. Service must be offered to a person. Non-devotees cannot appreciate Krishna consciousness by reading the Srimad Bhagavatam or any other Vedic literature wherein the activities of the Lord are described. They think that these activities are fictional, manufactured stories, because spiritual life is not explained to them in the proper mood. To understand the personal activities of the Lord, one has to seek the association of devotees. And by such association, when one contemplates and tries to understand the transcendental activities of the Lord, the path to liberation is open, and he is freed. One who has firm faith in the Supreme Personality of Godhead becomes fixed, and his attraction for association with the Lord and the devotees increases. Association with devotees means association with the Lord. The devotee who makes this association develops the consciousness for rendering service to the Lord, and then, being situated in the transcendental position of devotional service, he gradually becomes perfect. And before giving any of my own comments based on what we've heard so far, I offer my respects to my spiritual master, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And I'd also like to recognize Hari Parshad Prabhu, who's come here to teach the Srimad Bhagavatam as he does all over the world. Thank you very much for coming to ISKCON of Silicon Valley. Hare Krishna. I also like to offer my respects to all of you who have gathered here today, because you are real spiritualists on the highest path of devotion. Therefore, I offer you my deepest respects. Hare Krishna. Vancha kalpataruvascha kripa sindhubheva patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha is a mantra which means that those who are devotees, who have devotion for Krishna in their heart and who are practicing devotional service, they can fulfill our desires. And they are compared to desire trees. Do you know what a desire tree is? You're going to have to work with me today. A little bit, just a little bit. Does anybody know what a desire tree is? Did you ever stand under one? Desire tree is a tree that you would stand under, and any desire you have, then the tree would fulfill your desire. It's a spiritual tree. Some trees, they'll fulfill your desire if you want an orange or an apple or a mango, or maybe a little shade. But desire trees are those kinds of trees which are spoken about in the ancient scriptures as a tree that can fulfill any desire whatsoever. The problem isn't so much getting our desires fulfilled, but which desires we have. Oftentimes, when we invite people in a kind of guided meditation to sit under a desire tree, and then I'll ask them, what do you want? I feel a collective shudder go through the room where people realize I have no idea what I want. And this can be a problem because our desires are ultimately what define us, the quality of our desires. And it's natural in the living condition to have desires, aspirations. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, speaker Shukadeva Goswami says, Akama sarvakamo mokshakama udharati tivrena bhaktiyogena yajeta purusham param. That is, when you come into the association of devotees and when you start the process of devotional service, you may have a desire for being liberated from the material world. Because that seems kind of natural for some people, because there's a way in which the material world can be awkward. Tell me if the adjective I use, I'll use a few of them, matches how you feel about it. Awkward, or it can be, that's almost euphemistic. It can be difficult. Am I getting closer? It can be, what's another one you'd like to use? Embarrassing. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu mentions embarrassing. Strange. Miserable. Sticky. There's a lot of ways in which we might feel inconvenienced by the being in a material body and being in the material world. And there is a way in which some people then feel that, get me out of here. Just free me from this. And others may have some ambition for organizing their lives in such a way so they can get the best out of the material world. There are various ideas people have for how to do that. And then there may be people who are done with all that. And they have a sense of devotion to the Lord. So various kinds of people have various kinds of desires. I just mentioned a few categories, but there are combinations and permutations of and qualities of desires that people have. But when one comes into the association of devotees, and here's the Srimad Bhagavatam, there's a way that one's desire gradually becomes transformed and refined. And then one may be interested in tivrena bhakti, which means one-pointed attention on serving Krishna. And when we have that, when we're able to develop that kind of desire, we actually become happy. We become happy, and there is a way in which all our desires are automatically fulfilled. Throughout the Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna mentions that those whose main focus in life is serving Him, thinking of Him, want for nothing. Because in general, Krishna's taking care of everyone. And in specific, Krishna takes care of His devotees and fills their desires in such a way that they can make spiritual advancement. So in this verse, we see that one can refine one's desire, especially, and develop this sense of focused desire on Krishna by having the association of persons who are Krishna conscious. And Prabhupada makes a strong statement here that without that kind of association, then one can't make such advancement. Throughout the Vedic scriptures, there are statements about how if one has such association, it opens the door for further advancement. Mahat sevam dwaram ahurva muktes tamo dwaram yoshitam sangi sangam. There's a way in which Rishabhadeva in the 5th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam says, Mahat sevam, that if you develop a desire for being in the association of great personalities, mahats, that means people whose desire is only to serve Krishna, then your desire will become like that also. And that opens for you automatically the door to liberation. It's even considered just a byproduct to wanting to serve Krishna. And the opposite is true, that if you associate with worldly minded people, then you'll also become worldly minded. If you've ever met somebody who smokes cigarettes, you might ask them, how did you come to develop such an exalted habit? After all, who wouldn't want to breathe hot fire and smoke into their nice pink lungs and feel dependent on buying very expensive items over and over again? And you might trace it back to their association. In order to learn how to smoke cigarettes, you might have associated with somebody, for instance, somebody whose father smoked. A child might then see that, oh, this is something perhaps worthwhile, or even not even think it's worthwhile, but just by seeing a father or somebody else or a brother or friends smoking cigarettes, someone might think, let me try that. In the time when cigarettes were being promoted as meritorious, in fact, there was a cigarette, I don't know if it's still available, but it was called Merit. Merit cigarettes. Do you know what merit means? What does it mean? Look it up. We have a small research department today. Go ahead.
Merit is a noun, and it means the quality of being particularly good or worthy, especially so as to deserve praise or reward.
So there's a cigarette called Merit. And who might smoke a Merit cigarette? Someone who heard about it from maybe somebody on the television who said, I smoke Merit and my life's better for it. In fact, in the old days, there used to be people who wore a doctor's coat, like a white jacket, and a stethoscope around their neck, and they would come on the television and they would recommend a particular kind of cigarette and say, this one's the best. The implication being that if doctors say it's good for you, then it must be good. And a lot of people took up smoking. Not only that, in movies, there were iconic figures, movie stars, that is, who would be asked to smoke cigarettes while they were playing their role. You'll see, even nowadays, people who are playing a part in a movie, they'll also incidentally smoke cigarettes. And the idea behind that was to give people the idea that smoking cigarettes was a good idea because cool people were doing it. In fact, there was another cigarette called Cool, and Prabhupada noticed that. He said, it's hot, it's fire, but it's called Cool. It did have a little menthol in it, and I don't know if it's still available. My point is that there are myriad ways in which I can take up various practices in this world, including smoking, based on association. When I see somebody else doing it, when I'm with somebody else who's doing it, I might think it's a good idea, and especially if somebody's promoting it as a good idea. Merit, doctor, and so forth. And this comes to a very important philosophical point which we can benefit from. Krishna gives this in the Bhagavad-Gita. And that is that we'll take up the practices of those whom we associate with. And our nature is formed by the association that we take. Purusha prakritisto hi bhunte prakriti jan gunan karanam guna sangosya sarasad yoni janmasu. Krishna says in a very general way that karanam, the cause of whatever situation we're in right now. Is anybody here in a situation right now? Say yes. Everyone's in some situation It comes from a Sanskrit word, sta, which means to be situated somewhere. And it means that you're somewhere and you have circumstances in your life. So we all have that. So did you ever wonder how you got there, or how you got in the situation you're in now? Well, now you don't have to wonder anymore. You got it from association, sangha. Krishna says that every being has what he or she has right now because of previous association. And there's a big difference between association with those who are affected by the three modes of material nature. What are the three modes of material nature? They're the qualities of the material world. And each one of them has an effect on us in a particular way. Tamas, which is the lowest mode, is darkness. And it's marked by inertia or inactivity, or the inability to do anything besides be dark and sleep. And then there's rajas, which is marked by activity, often frenetic activity, in which we would like to attain the next best thing, and there is always a next best thing. And I'm continually chasing after how to make things better. And then there's goodness, or sattva. And in sattva, there's some clarity, lucidity, a sense in which I can see the difference, sattvam yad brahmadarshanam, between my body and my spiritual being. So when we're able to discern the effect of these various modes, and we can also identify the people who embody these modes, and then choose wisely in our association. For instance, if you want to become more oriented towards rajas, you might pick an institution. I don't want to offend any institution. In which people are oriented towards material progress. And if you associate with them, you'll become good at it. If you want to develop darkness and bad habits that drag you down, Prabhupada often would give the example of somebody who becomes an alcoholic. And he said, how would you become an alcoholic? And if you would walk through a park and find a couple of people who are good at it already, meaning how to drink alcohol, and then you would go and sit with them on the bench and say, like, how do you do this? And they say, well, you just drink this, and then after a while, you fall down, fall asleep, and you get back up, and then you beg some more money, and then you would go buy some more. And this is what we do. And then you'd say, can I try some? And then next thing you know, you could be in the same modality. And by the same token, and as is recommended by the Srimad Bhagavatam, Partivad dharano dumas tasmat agnis trayimayaha tamasas turajas tasmat sattvam yad brahmadarshanam. The gradation of modes should be studied. We should understand which is the most beneficial. And the Srimad Bhagavatam says that the mode of darkness, or tamas, is like raw wood. And then rajas is like smoke, because smoke disturbs, but it barely ever serves, unless you're a beekeeper. And then sattva is like fire. It gives utility. We need fire for everything, but especially in the context of the Srimad Bhagavatam, for offering Vedic sacrifice, through which one can elevate one's consciousness. And therefore, the Srimad Bhagavatam says, try for that, the higher mode of nature. And how might one do that? Well, just as one would cultivate the lowest mode of nature by association with somebody sitting on a park bench, drinking that which you could ignite with a match, and then falling down in a coma on the ground, one might find somebody with the quality of goodness, or somebody whose lifestyle is purified, And if one associates with such people, then it's quite natural for one also to develop clarity in one's life and clean habits through which one doesn't have to suffer later. In Rajas, the activities where one's driven by a passionate desire to enjoy the material world, there's only one possible result, and that is, should I say it? Suffering. You buy now, you suffer later. Whereas in goodness, there's a way in which you have the wherewithal to experience a kind of happiness which is based on your understanding that you're not your body. And then, of course, there are gradations above that. One called Shuddha Sattva. In the sense of the Bhagavad-Gita and the three modalities, and Sattva being the highest, there are competition amongst the modes, and sometimes we achieve one of the modalities like Sattva to some degree, but then it's overcome by passion. Did you ever set out on a path of goodness and feel yourself making progress, and then the next thing you know, and you're wondering, how did I get back down here? I'm glad that you resonate with that, because then we can commiserate on that point. And that's because of not only the power of the modalities, although they're lower energy, they still have power over us because we're tiny and because ultimately they're divine. They come from Krishna. So Krishna says in the Bhagavad-Gita, Daivahi esha gunamayi mama maya duratyaya mame vaye prapadyante maya metam tarantite. There's a way in which these modalities, the qualities of the material world, they're impossible to overcome on our own. But if we take Krishna's help, and that means taking the association of those who are devotees, then we can rise above the influence of the three modes of material nature. This is something Krishna also mentions in the Bhagavad-Gita when he says, Mam chayo vyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate sagunan samatityaitan brahmabhuyaya kalpate. If you're able to remain consistent in your practice of devotional service, then you'll, like an airplane taking off, it's going down the runway and it gradually lifts off and it rises above the modes of nature. Similarly, we can rise above the modes of material nature. So, to achieve this, Kapila Dev in today's verse is saying that the most practical way to achieve this rising above the modes of nature and coming to this spiritual position where we're not affected by the churning of the modes of nature. We're situated in our original spiritual consciousness in relationship to Krishna. He says, associate with those who are transcendental and who are on the path of devotional service. If you do that, then he says there's a step-by-step way in which you'll notice for yourself that you're coming to this higher stage. Anukramishati means that you'll notice improvement in yourself by stages. Step by step, you'll notice you're getting better. If you go to a good doctor when you have some illness and she prescribes medicine for you, then you take it. And she may also say that you're going to feel like this in a week and you'll feel even better in 2 weeks, and 3 weeks it'll be likely cleared up. And you'll be able to see for yourself and follow that path. So out of the many different practices of bhakti or devotional service, of which there are 64 distinguishable practices given in the scriptures, there are 5 which are particularly important. And out of those 5, which are to chant Hare Krishna, to worship the deities, I talked about that earlier today, to live in a holy place, the atmosphere is palpable and one can feel a sense of the spiritual world when one's in a holy place. Then there's hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, which we're doing today, and number 5, and it's not in in a hierarchical order, but number 5 is to associate with devotees. And so, if you don't do anything else but that, and of course, these 5 are highly recommended for those who are short of time, or for anybody else, because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in teaching about devotional service, said that there's 64 items, but out of them, these 5 are so powerful that even if you don't have faith in them, and even if you only have a little contact with them, then you'll make progress in devotional service. So, one of them is sadhu sangha, which means association with those who are serious about practicing bhakti. So that means that you should figure out where those devotees are and then show up. Either that, or you can do it another way, which is find out where they are and invite them to your home. I did that, my wife and I did that for many years in our home in Burlingame. This temple wasn't here at the time. We were slightly isolated, so we figured we'd invite the sadhus to come to our house. So every week we'd have a program at our house, and we'd invite devotees to come over. And because of that, we were able to, somehow or other, keep going in our devotional practice. Not the least of which was because when you invite devotees to your house, you have to clean your house. In fact, it's a sociological fact that when you invite somebody to your house, you generally clean it up before they get there. Even if it's a temporary fix, like throwing everything in a closet, putting away certain reading materials so that you look smarter than maybe you are. Put that book out, not that book. And in relationship with sadhus, when a sadhu is coming, one thinks twice, 3 times, 4 times, how do we look? How does our house look? If you have an altar and think, are the flowers fresh? Do the deities look bright? And then we think, what's the environment like here? Maybe we shouldn't have that in the house anyway. Prabhupada gave an example once that if you have a glass of ink, one of the ways to get rid of the ink is to pour in another substance, like milk. He gave the example. If you keep pouring the milk, then gradually all the ink will go out and it'll just have milk. So inviting those who you know are high-minded devotees to come into your house or any other environment you're in, or trying to be there where the devotees are, this is a smart idea. It's based on the science of association. That, again, reiterating, whomever we associate, we become like. And if we just show up and we're there with the devotees and keeping our ears open, listen. Because as mentioned in this verse, there's a way in which there's a sound that comes from the devotees that they speak in a certain way. And by hearing what they say, and especially those, it's another part of the science of association, that whatever's in a person's heart comes out in their speech. And there's a quality that comes out from the heart. It's very subtle, this science of association, because if somebody has a good intention and they speak, even if they're not fully articulate, the power of their speech will affect us in a positive way, will also be elevated. By the same token, or I should say on the other side of the token, if somebody has a misconception, even if they're articulating well, there's a way in which we might be adversely affected by what they say. Because sound carries consciousness, or speech carries consciousness. And it's very particular. Kapila Deva's particular here, he's saying that those who are pure devotees and they have their intention is pure in their heart, when they speak and we listen, then we'll naturally be elevated. That sounds like a really good deal to me. What does it sound like to you? Yeah, just show up and be attentive and listen. And vet your association before you take it. This is also helpful, if not vital. And Kapila Dev here is saying that it will be pleasing. The sound vibration will be pleasing. If it's not at first pleasing, then after some time it will become pleasing. When I first came to the Association of Devotees, it was in San Francisco in 1973. And I had a very strong attachment, well, I had some attachment, I can say, to the Bhagavad-Gita. I had received it from a friend, just a simple copy with translations, and had read it many, many times because it answered all my questions. And then I got Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad-Gita, and also a Sri Upanishad, and another book, a small book called On the Way to Krishna. I was acquainted with these books and appreciated them very much. And when I came to the temple, which was on Valencia Street in San Francisco in the Mission area, you know where that is, huh? So then I came into the morning program, because I moved into the temple, and there was a daily Srimad Bhagavatam class. And I had also looked at the Bhagavatam when I got into the temple, and it seemed like a lot of stories that were not, I couldn't figure out how they were relevant to the Bhagavad Gita and to spiritual advancement in general. I'll just back up and say that when I first saw the altar in the temple, I also didn't have a sense for Krishna being a person. I was more oriented towards an impersonal appreciation of God, maybe even pantheistically, in the sense that I saw God everywhere. I didn't see God everywhere necessarily, but I had a sense that He was everywhere, and I would chant a mantra that I got from a book. And then when I saw the altar, I wasn't really eager to see the forms of Krishna, but I more could identify with the flowers. And I really did look at the flowers, and then I'd chant the mantra and think, yeah, I can appreciate God there. And I remember how palpable it was being in the Srimad Bhagavatam class. Our temple, which opened around 1970, was a very ornate building because it used to be a funeral parlor. And it had white walls and floors, and it looked really beautiful when the devotees were inside, rather than the previous residents. And there was a skylight in the temple, and the light would come through in the morning time when we were having Srimad Bhagavatam class. And we used a lot of carnation flowers at that time. You could smell the carnations, and you could also see them strewn on the floor, because flower petals tend to get everywhere in Hare Krishna temples, because there's so many of them. And then there was the Bhagavatam class. And we were reading about Krishna's entry into Dwarka in the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And at first, again, it seemed like stories, and I couldn't understand the relevance of it. But as I sat with the devotees every day, little by little, it started to sound very interesting to me. And part of it was the way in which the devotees were attentive, and I could see by their demeanor and by their posture that they were leaning in and listening very intently. So just by being with them, I thought, well, maybe I'll be attentive and also lean in, even though I don't quite understand what's happening. And I can remember a point at which, in hearing the narration of the Srimad Bhagavatam, there is a discussion in the first canto of the Bhagavatam of how Krishna and his queens, there was an affectionate relationship between them. The queens had missed him so much, and they were feeling separation from him. And it occurred to me during one of the classes, I even remember who was giving class. It was our temple president at the time, Bhutatma Prabhu, who's now, he passed recently, a couple of years ago. But he was reading, and the devotees were appreciating, and it had some poetical rendering of the verse saying that the queens, they didn't want to quit the lotus feet of the Lord. They were so attached. And just that phrase, all of a sudden, after a month or so of sitting with the devotees, it suddenly struck me as being relevant to me and a bit profound. It's hard to even use those words because it was so visceral that it's hard to define it in a certain way, but it became attractive to me. And just after that, I started noticing the deities and thinking, wow, Krishna's here. And everything became more distinguishable to me. And the practice of devotional service, what the Srimad Bhagavatam was, gradually, step by step, and still gradually, step by step, it's an ever unfolding process of getting to know Krishna and his qualities and coming to like them. And then more than liking them, to being very attached to them and so forth. As is mentioned here, step by step, you'll become more intensely involved with the devotees and devotional service and more interested in hearing about Krishna as time goes by. And this all happens in the assembly of devotees. Smarantas Mariantas Cha Mita Gauga Haram Harim Bhakti Sanjayata Bhaktya Bibhratya Pulkham Tanum. The body becomes stimulated by, gradually, we talked about that this morning, just by hearing the topic, and by being with those who have bhakti, then one gets bhakti. What to speak of, there's a way in which, by the power of the association of devotees and hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, the obstacles to bhakti, which are an accumulation of bad habits, impressions, dictates from the mind to do the wrong thing. They're all stored within the heart. And it's mentioned in the verse that these are destroyed by the association of devotees and hearing about Krishna in that association. So smarantas smarayantas cha means that the devotees are also eager for others to hear about Krishna because of the effect it's had on them. So they try to facilitate other people. They say, why don't you come here and listen to the class? Or, come sit with us here, come to this festival and so forth so we can hear more about Krishna. So that's what they do. And then when we respond and we come into that association, then mita gauga haram harim. Krishna has a tendency to take away the obstacles to bhakti when we show a little bit of interest. It's his natural quality to help from within the heart. And then the verse says that we'll be so affected by that association that our bodies will also transform. There's ways in which there are symptoms that one's getting more and more attached to Krishna and hearing about Krishna. For instance, one's hair might stand on end. Or netre jalam gatra ruhesha harsha. The Shukadev Goswami says, netre jalam. Jalam means water and netre means eyes. So water might come from your eyes. A tear might come because you naturally feel attached to hearing about Krishna and the association of devotees, and it's direct, it's visceral. Therefore, a tear might come to your eye. Your hair might stand on end. And then there's some transformation taking place because of the association of devotees and because of hearing about Krishna. So at this point, we'll just take some reflections and questions. Reflection means any point that you heard so far that's stuck in your mind that might be helpful, or a question that you might have. Bali Prabhu. Please give Bali a mic.
Hare Krishna. Welcome back, Prabhu.
Thank you very much.
Actually, this is not my questions, but I couldn't answer, so I'm just asking you. So just in Chaitanya Charitamrita it says, Mali hoya bija se ropana sravana kirtana jale sei se sochana. Means as the tree sprouts, then you put water so that it grows. So similarly, Sravan and Kirtan, the hearing and chanting is essential for our development. So if you also, the tree, in a bija statement in the seed, if you put too much of water, it will also not grow, it may spoils. And if you give underwater, if you give very, very less, then also it will not grow. So there is exact matching. So the point of question is, what is our requirement, or what is to be considered the amount of devotion that is considered it is growing from the seed? Means, let's say, oh, I chant 1 round, I chant 2 hours, I chant, what is exactly, what is enough and what is more than enough, so that we don't destroy the devotion.
Thank you, Bali Prabhu. Well, firstly, we have to start from where we are. Swe swe adhikaryānishta saguna parikirtita. Krishna says to Uddhava in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam that if you're humble and wise enough to start from the position you're qualified for, then he said it's a guna, it's a good quality. Viparya tu dosha syad. But there's a fault if you try to do more than you're qualified for. Bhaktivinoda Thakur in that context gives an example in one of his writings that when you're climbing a ladder, if you try to run up the ladder, you may fall off. But if you make sure that your foot is firmly on a rung, and once you know that it is, and how do you know? How do you know you're alive? You discern that I'm steady here, and then you take the next step. He says if you run up too fast, you might fall. If you go too slowly and are hesitant, he says, then your advancement may be distant. It may take a long, long time to advance in devotional service. Someone has to discern how much can I do. For that, guidance is often helpful, just as in any discipline. If you have somebody who can observe what your situation is, some expert, and say, I think you're qualified for a little bit more. I've seen this in many disciplines I'm involved in. Someone is there pushing a little bit more, because I might say, well, I can't do this anyway. It's like, no, you can do it. Just a little practice, keep doing, and then what I didn't know on Monday, I do know on Thursday, and I feel like, oh, I'm glad that person pushed me a little bit. So that's helpful. It's also illegal to claim that one's permanently unqualified. As Prabhupada quotes from the Vedanta Sutra in one of his purports in the Bhagavad-Gita, Vyasadeva says that the Shastras are speaking to us and they're saying, rise, you can rise. And therefore, because the Shastras are true and they're speaking to us, it must be that we can rise. Otherwise, they wouldn't make any sense if I say like, yeah, I can't. No, you can. You have to apply yourself, but where? To the level that you're qualified for. And what is the qualification? It's one's shraddha, or one's context, understanding, and faith. Faith is described as having an understanding of one's constitutional position in relationship to Krishna, and Krishna being unlimitedly merciful and also capable of helping us, and us needing help. As mentioned in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Shraddha Shabde Vishwas Kahi Suridhanishchay Krishna Bhakti Koila Sarva Karma Krita Hoy. Shraddha, Shrad means the heart, and Da is an active verb. It means where you place something, where you're putting your heart. There's a sense of, I know that by performing devotional service, everything else will be achieved. I have that growing sense from hearing in the association of devotees. Then one can try according to one's level of shraddha. About being being overwhelmed by the practice of bhakti, or as you put it, drowned by doing too much. There is some sense of that in the verse, Vikriditam vrajavatur biraham cha vishnu shradhanvitona shunu yadata varna yadya. Shukadeva Goswami, in the context of the Rasa dance, which is a very esoteric chapter in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in which Krishna is dancing with his lovers in the forest, there is a way in which, if somebody doesn't have the proper context for that, if it's not been oriented towards who Krishna is, he's not an ordinary person. He's not a conditioned person from the material world, but he's ever liberated, and therefore his activities are not comparable to ours in the material world. If one doesn't have that context and understanding, then by hearing such pastimes, one might misunderstand. So it's more about and again, it's important in the association of devotees to have that context. As Haridas Thakur says, that even when we chant Hare Krishna, it's important to also simultaneously be receiving instruction about one's relationship with Krishna and one's non-relationship with the material world. Those two things go together, the chanting and the understanding, the context of who we are. If we have that, then we can add more and more water. And we'll be inclined to also, because it's according to our adhikari, the more qualification we have, the more we'll feel like doing it naturally, hearing and chanting. But I also think that the metaphor can fail. Metaphors are not always perfect. And that, there is a sense also given in the Chaitanya Charitamrita that the members of the Panchatattva headed by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, when they spread the Sankirtan movement, they wanted to drown the seed of material desire. There was such a flood that they gave of bhakti everywhere that even people who were trying to hang on to it, like in a flood, is like, where'd all my stuff go? It just gets washed away. So similarly, people who were determined to stay in the material world, their seed, the seed that had been planted, that I want to stay here, I want to be successful in the material world, that got washed away. It got drowned. So that's more likely than if you chant too much. If you're going to err on one side or the other of not chanting or chanting too much, it's okay to chant too much. Based on Tyakva sudharmam charanam bhujam harer bhajana pakvota patet tato yadi yatra kwa babajrama buddha mushikim govarta apto bhajatam sudharmata. Narada Muni says, okay, so what, you were a pakva, you weren't ready for it yet, but you did it anyway. We've seen that many times in the Krishna conscious movement. Especially when we had an ashram system and people just move in. And we've seen people try their hardest, ishokenmeni, as they say in Japan. They just go forward with great alacrity, and then next thing you know, they're gone. Narada said, no loss. At least they tried for it. You jumped for the ring, you missed it, so you get, in devotional service, it doesn't mean you get a 0. It means you get credit for having jumped for it, even though you didn't have the strength to grab it at that time. He says, forward progress is, and your intention to do it counts. So I have a difference with the idea that you could drown your devotional service by too much chanting. Although it's good to start where you can. Kanka Devi.
Thank you, Maharaj. It's a wonderful class. When you were talking about going to the temple, I was thinking of the story when Srila Prabhupada was being dragged by his friend to go see his Guru Maharaj. He said, no, we have so many swamis that come to our house. I don't need to go see another swami. But his friends kept encouraging him and saying, yes, you have to come, you have to come.
Yeah, the idea of dragging is also there in the Upadeshamrita, that when one starts the process of bhakti, even if you change your mind, you'll be forcibly dragged. It's there in the light of the Bhagavad as well. I mean, after all, that's what devotees do, basically. They try to drag people in different directions, especially if they see some spark. It's more like fanning the spark. If they see some inclination, they'll want to give more. And that's one of the reasons it's helpful to have association. And my wife has told the story several times, but she tells how she was in Los Angeles, in New Dwarka, back around 1972 or 3, and she had a rough patch, some miscommunication. I don't know even, I haven't looked into it that deeply, what happened. But she said even though she lived right down the street from Shri Shri Rukmini Dwarkadish in the temple, she didn't come for 5 days. And somebody noticed, and it was actually a devotee named Guru Mata Dasi, and she said, "Oh, I noticed that such and such is not here." And without inquiring, because there was no texting back then, hate to shock anybody, but she got a plate of Mahaprasadam, that's sacred food offered to Krishna, which is coming up soon. And she just brought it to the door and knocked on the door and said, "Here, I brought you this." Didn't say much more than that, but my wife credits her for turning her life around suddenly. And said she realized that like somebody cared, and there was no more darkness, and she came back into the association of devotees. Of course, it was only 5 days, but that was a big thing back then. 5 days, you live on the block and you don't show up. It's like, what happened? So this is one of the benefits of association with devotees. Krishna can be a little bit, where he is neutral. He says in the Bhagavad-Gita, "Samoham sarvabhuteshu name dveshosti napriya." I'm cool with whatever you do. Like, you want to enjoy the material world? We'll arrange 8,400,000 species for you. You can choose from those over the next several trillion years and try it out. See what you like, and then when you're ready to come back, you come back. But devotees are a little different. They're like, yeah, he's ready. Devotees are actually supposed to be patrolling and looking out and seeing, like, is that person interested? Like in Japan, it just came back from Japan. It's culturally impolite to look at people, and you're not supposed to look at somebody. And people, generally, they don't look. Sometimes I'll catch them, especially if you're, a big white person there, and they'll on the train, they're like, I saw you looking. But when we go outside, and for instance, just the other day, we were down the street from the temple at a train station, and we held a public harinam. That means we were chanting out loud, and then there were a few devotees that were walking around with some literature. And the way it's done there, as we chant, and then the people, when they walk down the street, if they look or they stop, if they stop, they slow down, that's like putting up a big sign saying, "I'm interested." What to speak if they look at you, then immediately the devotees run over. It's permission to go and talk to them. Otherwise, it's like this. In fact, they do this a lot. Just, nope, closed, not open. So devotees are always looking for a spark. And if they see it in anybody, even in an animal, they'll, give them a little peanut butter cookie or something. Shivananda Sain, a dog came up to the Harinam party as they were on their way traveling to Jagannath Puri. Said, "He's in. He's one of our people. Take care of him. Feed him every day. He needs at least a pound of rice, cooked." And he took care of the dog until he was able to meet Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. That's another benefit of devotee association. If you get too far away, then you can lose that benefit of those close to you pulling you in. And no, come on, try again. Keep doing. Okay, there was just a couple more. Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
So my question is about stagnation. And so I think in Krishna consciousness, I think one of the main things to help avoid stagnation is Sangha, like devotee Sangha. And but also on the flip side, sometimes I've noticed that sometimes I feel maybe I get too comfortable within the Sangha. And there's a sense that even if you receive some small amount of appreciation or validation, then we use that as an excuse to maybe not advance. Does that sort of, I guess, what's the right way to avoid against that mentality of sort of maybe getting too comfortable there where even sort of positive things, and we maybe use that as a mind makes up an excuse to stagnate? That's sort of my question, Maharaj.
Well, thank you for such an important question. And there is a way in which in any discipline, when you practice it for a while, it can become rote. There's stories of monks from other traditions who have midlife crises where after 30, 50 years of practice, and they think, like, what am I doing? And it can happen to anybody at any time. Vigilance. The price of freedom is vigilance. I think Thomas Jefferson said that, one of the statesmen from the early days of the formation of the United States. Vigilance is to always be watching and make sure that we don't go into the practice by rote. And my father told me when he was in college, he was part of a repertory theater. And repertory theaters, anybody familiar? They do the same play over and over again. That's why the word repertory. And because they learn a play and they'll do it for a year, sometimes longer, because people want to come see it. And if you're doing the same play over and over again, then there's a way in which you might take a little bit off your performance. Because, like, yeah, I've done that before. It just becomes a repetition of the same thing you said without much thought behind it. So the producer of the play, the director, would deliberately tell various actors to come out onto stage from the wrong side, because there's direct stage direction. Enter stage left, exit stage right. He would say, no, come enter stage right, exit stage left. And he would also cue them to say the wrong lines at a certain point. And why did he do that? Because he didn't want anybody falling asleep and just taking it for granted. And therefore, they were always on guard, because they were thinking, oh, wait a minute, is that the right line? Did they come from the right place? And they'd have to adapt to it. So it's important in our practice to avoid stagnation, which means?
It means a state of not flowing or moving, and it comes from the 1660s, and it comes from stagnatum, which is standing water, pond, or swamp.
Yeah, if it's just sitting there, it gets stagnant. So it's helpful to, for instance, I'll give you an example. When we have the wherewithal to do these types of things, the repetition of the so-called 10 offenses against the holy name comes from one verse in the Padma Purana, and then we say them as 10. Actually, it's 11, because we say it's also an offense to be inattentive while chanting. And after a while, you may notice in any kind of a practice that you do every day, everyone will just say it, and it's over. And if you ask, what did we just say? It's like, I don't know, but it's over. So the principle that my father's director had in the repertory theater would be something like, okay, stop at 5 and ask somebody randomly. Do we ever do this? Say yes. Yes. Yeah, we're always on our toes, because somebody might say, like, what does that mean? And give a commentary on it. So what is number 5? Where does was Artavad come from? And then you discuss it a little bit. Say, what is the origin of that? It comes from Purvavimamsa, the idea that there's some exaggerated parts of the Vedas that describe certain rituals, and then to consider anything about the holy name, the glories, to be exaggeration, as similar to Artavad as defined by Jaimini, then it's an offense. And if you know the origin of it and you have a sense of context for it, then when you say it, you think, yeah, I have a better idea for that one. So it's important in any kind of sangha to have these kinds of discussions to go more deeply within the definitions. That's why I always ask the research department to look up words. Because even in English, you can just say something and you have a amorphous or general idea of what it means, but you know specifically what it means. But when you trace it back, that's what that means? Then you have a new life with it. You hear it and you say, remember the other day, it wasn't the other day, it was more like the other month, we were in Govardhan and we were reading, and Prabhupada uses will-o'-the-wisp. Look that up. Is that the one, will-o'-the-wisp? I've heard that so many times, and it just, I don't stop and say, what does will-o'-the-wisp mean? But when you look it up, you'll never be the same when you hear the translation of it. When next time you hear it, you go, oh, that's mystical. What is it?
Will-o'-the-wisp is a light that appears at night over marshy ground.
Keep going.
Um,
A light that appears at night over marshy ground. There's a history to the word.
It's from a myth. And
Yeah, keep going.
Foolish travelers who were said to try to follow the light and were then led astray into the marsh. And then the light was first known and is still known as ignis fatuus, which in Latin means foolish fire.
Foolish fire, will-o'-the-wisp. Here, watch. So there's a way in which now I heard that, I'll never be the same when I hear the will-o'-the-wisp, the whole metaphor of the material world as given in the first verse of the Bhagavatam, how it's an illusory representation. It's not reality. It's a will-o'-the-wisp. It's a little fire above the marsh, and travelers at night get rerouted because they follow that. It's like, you sure? Yeah. Into the marsh. And that's the material world. So if you take the time to look at what you're doing, that's the main thing. Be conscious of what you're doing. Even chanting, when we're chanting Hare Krishna, you can, as we said this morning, it's like you can go to the gym and you can lift nothing and say, yeah, I went to the gym. Well, how come you're still so out of shape? No, I don't know. And same thing, chanting. What happened? How come you're not advancing? Why are you still eating Doritos or whatever it is? The quintessential junk food. Because you're not leaning into it. You're not really getting it. So try to get it. Just try to be there when you're there. And that's something that vigilance is the price you have to pay for freedom. Vigilant means you really have to be aware of what you're doing, and that is what Rupa Goswami, the spirit of what Rupa Goswami talks about in Niyamagraha. Just don't do it for the sake of doing it. That's illegal, and it's also illegal to stop doing it, because you'll stop doing it when you do it by rote, because he's like, oh, it's just imagination. Those guys, those Mangalartik going guys, they're just, it's just fanatical. And then you'll go off in some other direction. So to preserve any practice, and equally so or more so in devotional service, be vigilant and think about what you're doing. Be very present and aware. Yes.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
This morning you mentioned how a trained doctor with their stethoscope can hear more than just the beating of the heart, but can hear the overtones and can receive a lot of information. And it made me think how the tone of our voice communicates more than even the words we say. And that made me think of the Bhagavatam verse that a pure devotee, their voice is imbued with these saffron mercy particles. And I was wondering if you could give us some tips on how to practice our speech and our chanting to improve the tone so that we can chant in such a way that Krishna can feel our tone and feel our emotion in such a way that pleases him.
Well, be sincere. And nobody else can. We have to reach our own sincerity. If you search for it and find it, it's in there. Look for it. Try to find it. It's the most valuable substance there is. I know I've used this before, but I like it too much. Chandi Chowk, New Delhi. Gulab Singh. I used to go there to buy my oils for the deities, and he sells all these rare oils, and I remember I had a godbrother who had lots of money. He'd brag about, $20,000 for a little thing of musk or whatever. And he sells to big companies too, go there for essential oils and pay thousands of dollars for a tiny little thing. And if you go there and say, just give me one little vial with a drop of sincerity in it, it's like, sorry, can't sell it to you. You got to find that out for yourself. That's a great connection point in devotional service, is when we find our own sincerity. That means looking inside and say, no, I really do want Krishna. I really do want to surrender. Even if you can't do it. Even if you give me the Bhagavad-Gita, third canto. Yeah, give me the third canto of the Bhagavad-Gita. If you can do that, we're going to give you an award. The third chapter, 21st verse, where Prabhupada describes how important sincerity is in the practice. That even if you're not... Thank you very much. That's 31. Yeah, it's 31. Krishna says, those persons who execute their duties according to my injunctions and who follow this teaching faithfully, without envy, become free from the bondage of fruitive activities. You want to hear the purport? Yes, sir. Okay, anybody who didn't say yes, cover your ears. The injunction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna, is the essence of all Vedic wisdom and therefore is eternally true without exception. As the Vedas are eternal, so this truth of Krishna consciousness is also eternal. One should have firm faith in this injunction without envying the Lord. There are many philosophers who write comments on the Bhagavad-Gita but have no faith in Krishna. They will never be liberated from the bondage of fruitive action. But an ordinary man with firm faith in the eternal injunctions of the Lord, even though unable to execute such orders, becomes liberated from the bondage of the law of karma. In the beginning of Krishna consciousness, one may not fully discharge the injunctions of the Lord, but because one is not resentful of this principle and works sincerely without consideration of defeat and hopelessness, he will surely be promoted to the stage of pure Krishna consciousness. So, if there's that sense that, Krishna, I believe in your statements, even though I'm so imperfect I can't follow them yet, still, that's my sincerity, that I'm going to keep following them no matter how imperfect I am. I'll tolerate my own ineptitude in doing it. It's the most revelatory moment in anyone's life or day if you can actually find it. And especially if you're chanting Hare Krishna and you can take some time to inspect your own heart and say, now where did it go? Where's that sincerity? That whatever happens, Krishna, I'm going to follow your instruction no matter how lowly I am at this point. And I don't want anything else. I just want you, even though right now I'm preoccupied with so many things. But if you can find that sincerity. And Prabhupada wrote in one letter that search for sincerity is the same as sincerity. You have to you can start anywhere, and even the smallest molecule of that, even the sense that I want to be sincere, is also sincerity. And that can simply grow. And it's that which has the effect. And in fact, I just had an experience recently when we were in Govardhan, and an old friend, godbrother, came there who's been around for many years, maybe 1970 or something, and physically not doing great, but still getting around with alacrity. And like most people in the world, have gone through many different eras in their life with ups and downs. And he was there, and he had this non-competitive spirit, only trying to do his level best. And I just noticed how the devotees reacted to him. So they were inspired by his sincere effort. So it can't be faked. There's no imitation. There's no affectation one can put on one's voice, although sometimes people do that. If you sound like a great learned person or something like that. Even if you can articulate well, if that sincere if that molecule of sincerity isn't there, then the power isn't there also. One has to sincerely want to surrender to Krishna. And if it's there, then even if one's a simple person and not a huge speaker or learned scholar, whatever might attract the masses, still one will be effective in the process of devotional service. So, yes. Oh, Prabhu, please. Hari Parshad.
Thank you so much, Prabhu, for the wonderful talk. And I'd like to continue reflection upon the question that was asked about overwatering the creeper. I don't know why it's called a creeper of bhakti, the wine of bhakti. So, in Nectar of Instruction, Sri Rupa Goswami, 7th verse, he compares our condition to jaundice, and he says the remedy is to take medicine in the form of Krishna Nam. The tendency sometimes is to overdose on the medicine, and I think that was the spirit of the question. So, is there any point of time at which we can say no to a particular devotional activity because we feel we are overdosing on it? And overdose of anything basically leads to a negative result. You are saying you slightly disagree, it's okay to overdose because even if you fall away, it's still to your profit. But isn't there some caution against overdosing given by our tradition? I'd like to hear your thoughts about it.
Yeah, thank you for coming back for more refinement on that question. What I said was that if you're going to err on the side of taking too much or too little, I'd rather take too much and sort it out later. There is some sense of caution in the way of an over-endeavor. Of course, it's mentioned really in the context of over-endeavoring for mundane things that are very difficult to achieve. But there are ways in which when devotees in the early Krishna consciousness movement, pioneering and spreading Krishna consciousness, might take on so much, and even now, they might take on so much that they might neglect their own very important practice of focusing on japa and reading and so forth. I mean, services are absolute, but the most important is to first have a really strong foundation oneself. Don't be insane and crazy by not reading Prabhupada's books. In other words, if you don't read regularly, you will go insane because of the way the world's working nowadays. And so regulating how much you do. Recently, quite a few older devotees resigned in a timely way from working with the GBC. Because, and I talked to all of them, and they said, it's the time. Some of them are in their 70s and so forth. And other people will be more effective. Besides, this is the time in my life where I need to focus more on the last lap. And so that sense of proportion at each time of our life is also important. Those who are brahmacharis or have been brahmacharis have had the experience of unabated access to service 24 hours a day. It's a very blissful life. When you enter into a grihastha ashram, then there is a sense like I have to balance between these two things. And what I've seen in the past, those who were grihasthas, but then they thought they were sannyasis. And then they misapplied the ways in which they needed to work at that particular time in their life and neglected their families emotionally or even physically, not caring for them, thinking like, yeah, but I have to be renounced, and this is my expression of devotional service. And there might have been parents also who didn't give as much attention to their children as needed, because they had a sense of overdoing the other part of devotional service. And Prabhupada would give statements like, well, somebody asked, now I have a child, I can't do my deity worship like I used to. And Prabhupada said, your child is now your deity. You worship, that's how you worship Krishna, to give full attention to your child. So your child grows up with that sense of complete emotional support and so on. So there are ways in which we have to be discerning about how I fit in. There is a way that we might become morose also, like I can't do enough. And then there may be times when we do so much on one thing, we forget the other aspects. That's more likely than overdoing devotional service. I mean, just the image of pouring too much water from the metaphor on the seed. Say, if you decide to one day chant 64 rounds, has anybody done that? Well, if you'd like to, one day we'll come in here and try it and see if you feel drowned. Like on the day when we chant the whole Bhagavad-Gita, someone said, that's too much. Nobody says the next day, that was too much Gita. Everyone says, Hansa Priya will confirm this, they'll come up and say, could we do this every day? When there's a 24-hour kirtan, as Giriraj Maharaj described in Bombay, there was a group that were related with Vrindavan, and they were doing these 24-hour kirtans, and then Prabhupada liked it. And he said to Giriraj Maharaj, who was the temple president, you should do this too. We should have 24-hour kirtan every day. And Giriraj Maharaj was, every day? How are we going to get anything done? And Prabhupada said, okay, at least once a week. And then they started doing that, and Giriraj Maharaj said, all the problems that were in the temple, we just wait till after Sunday because mostly they were all solved. So, my experience in my life is that there are different eras in our life, and we have to adjust accordingly to make sure that we have some sense of balance. And oftentimes when people would fanatically jump into more than they could handle, even in relationship to their worldly duties, then oftentimes they would end up as despots somewhere, or they would be estranged from their family and then lose their balance in devotional service. So we have to be careful and inventive and somehow or other keep the transcendental vibration going at the level we can. I didn't really answer your question because I'm trying to search for a place in which somebody, if you would kindly offer the solution, where is it that somebody overdosed on chanting and then like, oops, too much?
In course of studying the Nectar of Instruction, in the 7th verse itself, Rupa Goswami specifies that there are two qualities of effective chanting. He says, Adarat Anudinam. He says, Adarat means the medicine should be taken with due respect and it should be taken every day. So, what I realized was that as soon as we lose respect for the process, that is when we have started moving into the direction of overdose. Some people lose anudinam. They do too less and they do not do the process every day. But some people do it too much and then they lose the respect for the process. So Rupa Goswami is giving the analogy of taking a medicine, and a medicine is supposed we begin by taking small quantity so that we have respect for the medicine. And then there is a very nice verse in the Hari Bhakti Vilas, Shanai Shanai Suvispashtam, Na Dhrutam Na Vilambitam, Na Nyunam Na Adhikam Vapi Japam Kuryat Dine Dine. Shanai Shanai, chant slowly, clearly, not too fast, not too slow. And it says not too less, not too much. It doesn't specify an exact quantity because Vedic calculations are like that. They are relative to the level of advancement of the person. So I like that between the guru and the disciple, the guru decides as an expert physician what is too much of a dose for him and what is too little of a dose for him. But I am very happy to hear your thoughts, Prabhuji.
Yeah, that's very helpful what you said. And to me, it translates into, in a practical way, that consistency is more important than quantity. Consistency, as Prabhupada used to say, drops a day wear the stone away. And it's much harder to be consistent than it is to make a big show for oneself or others that I did so many, or I'm doing so much, but then where are you next year and the year after? It's the long-term effect of finding the pace at which one can consistently take the medicine, not be outside of it, is very helpful. And oftentimes it comes up in the context of japa. Is japa, it's our own responsibility. Nobody else can do it for you. No one's going to fly in and say, I'll chant your japa for you. Don't wait for that. You have to decide that you're going to do it yourself. But then it may be that you just can't do more than a certain number. So I always give the advice that find the number that you won't go below, like as the medicine. Don't do more than less and then less than what your minimum is. You can do more, but just don't do less. And if you can find that pace of taking your medicine, there's a powerful effect, because the mind is so tricky. They say, oh, I already did so much the other day. Now I won't do anything. And that not anything turns into a week, a month, a year, 20 years, 30 years. And I have godbrothers I've met. It's like, yeah, it's been 30 years since I chanted, and all they did was take a day off. So the consistency over time in taking the medicine is very helpful, because oftentimes when we don't have a sense of flexibility, then the mind overreacts. There's another verse that Krishna gives to Uddhava, now that we've got on this vein, where he says, controlling the mind, one has to be like an expert horseman. And he says sometimes the horseman, or a horse rider, the horse person, lets out the reins. lets out the reins a little bit, and sometimes pulls the reins in. It's not always, come on! The horse will throw you off its back. But if you're sensitive and you realize, oh, the horse is not in a great mood today, like okay, let's go. So same thing. We have to be inventive and encourage our minds. Don't take too less, but don't take too more. That also we could put in that stream, right? This is fun, but time is probably up. And I thank everyone for coming in for the early morning japa today. I would like to welcome Hari Parshad Prabhu for coming all the way here to the ISV community. Thank you for giving your association here, there, and everywhere. We connected a little bit this morning, and he told me that he's fully engaged in speaking around. So thank you for taking care of him and honoring him as the great scholar of bhakti, and we're the better for it. And I thank you very much. Hare Krishna.